Let's begin with President Biden, who is now back in Washington, D.C., where his top domestic priorities like infrastructure and voting rights are coming into sharper focus. He landed at Joint Base Andrews last night after wrapping up his first foreign trip as commander-in-chief that featured a high-stakes summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva, Switzerland. Both leaders agreed there was room for compromise on topics like nuclear weapons, prisoners, and ambassadors, but it's unclear if Putin will actually take concrete steps to stop cyber attacks and address human rights issues. Ed O'Keefe has the latest from Geneva.
Here in Geneva, the two leaders made modest progress with word that they're going to allow ambassadors from either country to return to Moscow and Washington. But beyond that, as President Biden said, it could be several months before it's known whether this summit was worth it and whether Russia changes its behavior.
I did what I came to do.
Returning to the White House overnight, President Biden seemed pleased after his 3-hour summit with Russian President Putin.
The tone of the entire meetings, good, positive.
The two leaders emerged with some potential compromises. They planned to start a strategic dialogue on the future of nuclear weapons and discuss the fate of American prisoners being held in Russia.
The question about American citizens that were in Russian prisons, we discussed that. There could be some compromise.
I'm not going to walk away on that.
But the two signaled they're still at odds over issues like cybersecurity and human rights. Putin has a history of quashing dissent and jailing political enemies like Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who's been imprisoned for months. Putin refused to even utter Navalny's name.
This person knew that he was breaching the laws effective in Russia.
While the president warned of what could happen if Navalny dies in prison.
I made it clear to him that I believe the consequences of that would be devastating for Russia.
Putin also said political dissent in his country could lead to what he called America's disorder, slamming everything from gun violence to the Black Lives Matter movement.
What we saw was disorder, destruction, violations of the law, etc.
And he equated arresting political protesters with the arrests of rioters at the January 6th Capitol attacks.
That's a ridiculous comparison. They're very different criteria.
Putin also refused to acknowledge Russia's role in recent cyber attacks on American critical infrastructure.
I think just throwing out these insinuations at the expert level, that's inappropriate.
Mr. Biden said he gave Putin a list of 16 U.S. infrastructure sectors like energy and water systems and airports that he says are off limits to attacks.
And if in fact they violate these basic norms, we will respond.
President Biden said the world will find out within a few months if any of Putin's promises will hold. But he lost his temper when asked why he seemed confident that Putin could change his behavior.
Hey, what do you do over there? So when did I say I was confident?
He later apologized.
I shouldn't have been such a wise guy with the last answer I gave.
Now that the president's back in Washington, he faces significant domestic challenges, including the fate of his massive infrastructure proposal. Before leaving Geneva, he told reporters he wasn't yet aware of the details of a new bipartisan infrastructure plan that picked up significant support overnight. Anne-Marie and Vlad?
All right, Ed, thank you very much. For more on this, let us bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ian Lee. Ian, you are joining us from London. So, Ian, the general consensus has been that U.S.-Russia relations are pretty bad, that they're as bad as they've ever been. I'm wondering if the general consensus is now that this summit moved the needle in any way on that.
I guess it's wait and see. You know, as President Biden said, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. At least both sides know where they stand. President Putin said it's hard to tell if relations will improve, Anne-Marie, but quoted Leo Tolstoy on the possibility of a better outlook, saying, "There is no happiness in life. There is only a mirage on the horizon, so cherish that."
All right. Ian, so the question, of course, is whether or not this was a constructive summit because Vladimir Putin appeared to show no signs of changing Russia's behavior when it comes to human rights issues and cybersecurity. I mean, when we say that, that is our impression, but we have no idea what the President of the United States pressed President Putin on and how he responded. I mean, I think what we'll know is not in how Putin battles the press, which is something that he loves doing. Clearly, you could tell that he loves, trolling members of the press, but how he actually reacts when he goes back to the Kremlin, when he goes back to Moscow. And from that standpoint, only time will tell.
Yeah, Vlad, the two men were able to find areas where they could possibly work together. They agreed to return ambassadors to each other's capitals soon, and that in particular will be crucial to continue any progress or anything that was agreed upon from the summit. The two presidents, though, frankly, don't see eye to eye on a number of issues, one being human rights. Biden says he'll keep bringing it up, though, because that's what the United States stands for. On cybersecurity, Putin agreed there is mutual interest in the subject. President Biden gave the Russian president that list of 16 infrastructure sectors that need to be off limits to hackers, and that includes healthcare, food, energy, financial services, and defense. Going forward, the two presidents said they do plan to have a working group to deal with the issues like cybersecurity.
Was there any discussion about the drawing down of NATO troops near Russia or any other type of compromise?
Yeah, so when it comes to NATO troops and them being along the borders, also Russian troops, being along the border with NATO countries, this is an issue that both countries are very much concerned about. But the United States says that, they're going to keep their troops there, at least for now. There hasn't been any concrete talks because right now Russia has their troops near the border, just as NATO has their troops near the border. But it's those NATO countries that are right there. Those are the ones that are particularly concerned about their own national security. So that will probably be something far off in the future for their discussions. Tensions definitely need to come down for any sort of drawdown of troops. But there was another area of agreement that the two countries, and that was arms control. Russia says in the coming weeks they expect talks to resume on that issue.
And Ian, as we saw in Ed O'Keefe's report, both President Biden and President Putin agreed to allow ambassadors, as you said, to return to their respective posts in Washington and Moscow. This is a pretty big deal when it comes to rebuilding diplomacy between the two countries. I know in many instances it's sort of glossed over. We're so fixated in the media on the political theater of it all that line is basically an aside. Oh yeah, there's going to be the return of ambassadors to Moscow and Washington. That's a huge deal to know that for the last couple of years those ambassadors have not been there.
You're absolutely right, Vlad. You can't improve relations if you're not talking with each other, and that's what ambassadors do. Ambassadors are the presence of the other country in their other capitals, and they're able to have conversations. They're able to have those high-level representations where they're able to bring up crucial issues. We talked about cyber attacks. We talked about arms control. We talked about prisoner swaps. I mean, these are all issues that ambassadors can bring up, they can push, and they can discuss with their counterparts, with the different foreign ministries, so that they can hash out these agreements. So you're absolutely right. If you don't have that high level of representation, you're basically stalled relations and you can't move forward. So this you could say is a bit of a thawing of relations where you do have ambassadors returning to the capital soon.
All right, Ian Lee in London. Thank you so much, Ian.